The evening rush had begun and the city pulsed with the noise of horns, footsteps, and hurried conversations. Neon lights flickered against glass towers, painting the streets in restless colors. Amid the chaos, a nurse named Clara Reyes walked home from her late shift at St. Mary's Hospital. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair pulled into a messy knot, and exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. She was used to seeing emergencies inside sterile walls, but what stopped her that night was something she never expected. On the corner of Fifth Avenue, beneath the flicker of a broken streetlight, a young woman lay collapsed on the pavement. Her hands were limp at her sides, her breathing shallow, her face pale as porcelain. A crowd had gathered, but no one moved closer. Some muttered about calling an ambulance, others simply pulled out their phones to film. Clara dropped her bag without hesitation and knelt beside the girl, checking her pulse. Weak but there. She brushed dark strands of hair from the girl's forehead and realized she couldn't be more than 21. "Miss, can you hear me?" Clara asked firmly. No response. The girl's lips parted slightly, but only a faint gasp escaped. Clara's heart raced. Whoever she was, she needed immediate help. Clara looked through the girl's small designer handbag, hoping to find an ID or medical card. Inside she found a phone, sleek and expensive, buzzing with missed calls. On the lock screen was a photo, an older man in a sharp suit, arm around the very girl lying unconscious. The caption read, "Daddy's pride, forever." Clara's throat tightened. She had seen that man's face on billboards and news channels. Adrian King, the billionaire tycoon, owner of King Global Enterprises, one of the most powerful men in the country. And this unconscious girl must be his daughter. For a moment, Clara hesitated. She was just a nurse, living paycheck to paycheck, invisible to people like him. But training overpowered fear. She dialed the emergency number on the phone. The line clicked and a deep, controlled voice answered. Adrian King speaking. Clara's breath caught. She forced her voice steady. "Mr. King, I'm sorry to call like this, but your daughter is lying unconscious on Fifth Avenue. I'm a nurse. I found her just now." There was silence on the line, heavy and sharp. Then the man's tone fractured. "What did you say?" "She's breathing, but weak. She needs immediate care. I'm staying with her until help arrives. I'll be there in minutes." Adrian said, his voice a mixture of command and desperation. "Don't leave her side." Within minutes, the sound of a sleek black car skidding to the curb split the night. The door flung open, and Adrian King himself emerged. His presence drew murmurs from the crowd, but he ignored them all, his eyes locked on the fragile figure lying on the street. He dropped to his knees, a man known for power and precision now trembling as he touched his daughter's cheek. "Lila," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My angel. What happened to you?" Clara quickly explained, her tone professional though her chest tightened at the sight. "I don't know how long she's been here. Her pulse is weak, she needs oxygen fluids." An ambulance arrived, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Paramedics rushed to lift Lila onto a stretcher. Adrian followed closely, refusing to let go of her hand. Clara stepped back, her role finished, but Adrian's voice stopped her. "You, nurse, what's your name?" "Clara Reyes," she said quietly. His eyes, sharp even through fear, locked on hers. "You're coming with us." "I'm not family," she protested. "You're the reason my daughter is still alive." Adrian snapped, his tone rough but not unkind. "That makes you family enough." Clara hesitated, but something in his voice, pleading beneath command, made her nod. She climbed into the ambulance, settling at Lila's side. The billionaire sat across, clutching his daughter's hand as though his will alone could anchor her to life. Inside St. Mary's emergency wing, chaos unfolded. Doctors swarmed, machines beeped, nurses shouted vitals. Clara moved instinctively among them, assisting without being asked. Adrian remained at the foot of the bed, helpless in a world he could not control. His power, his wealth, his empire, none of it mattered here. Only his daughter's faint breathing did. Hours later, silence settled over the private room where Lila finally rested. Ivy lines fed strength back into her fragile body. Clara stood quietly by the door ready to slip away, but Adrian turned toward her. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot from unshed tears. "You saved her," he said simply. Clara shook her head. "I only found her. The doctors, no." His voice was firm. "If you hadn't called me, if you hadn't stayed with her, she might have." He stopped, unable to finish. He swallowed hard, then added, "I owe you more than I can ever repay." Clara lowered her gaze. "I didn't do it for anything in return." For the first time Adrian King, the untouchable billionaire, looked vulnerable. "Still, I want to know why she was on that street. Alone. Unconscious. My daughter never leaves without security." Clara hesitated. She had glimpsed something earlier, in the way Lila's hands were marked faintly by bruises, her lips cracked, her clothes slightly disheveled despite their cost. Something was wrong, something no amount of wealth could shield her from. "She'll tell you," Clara said softly. "When she wakes up." Adrian nodded slowly, but in his eyes flickered both dread and determination. At dawn, as light spilled through the blinds, Leela stirred. Adrian was at her side instantly. Clara stood back watching. The girl's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze. "Daddy," she whispered hoarsely. Adrian clasped her hand, his relief overflowing. "I'm here, my sunshine. You're safe now." But as her eyes filled with tears, she shook her head weakly. "No, Daddy. You don't understand. I wasn't safe. Not at all." Her words trembled in the air, and both Adrian and Clara realized the collapse on the street was not an accident. It was a cry for help. And the truth behind it would shake both their lives forever. Adrian's pulse thundered in his ears. He bent lower, gripping his daughter's fragile hand. "What do you mean, Leela? Tell me." Her lips trembled. "I couldn't breathe anymore, Daddy. The walls kept closing in. Everywhere I went, they followed me. Cameras, people, expectations. I tried to smile, but inside I felt like I was drowning. I thought if I left, if I just walked away, maybe someone would finally see me. Not as your daughter, not as a headline. Just me." Adrian's chest ached. He had built an empire brick by brick, believing it was all for her, for security, for a future no one could take away. Yet in giving her everything, he had taken something more precious, her freedom to simply be a child. Clara, standing near the monitors, felt her throat tighten. She had seen patients collapse under invisible burdens before, but never had the weight of loneliness sounded so heavy as it did now. Adrian brushed his daughter's hair from her damp forehead, his voice breaking. "Lila, why didn't you tell me? You could have come to me." Her eyes filled with tears. "Because you're always busy, Daddy. Always flying, meeting, signing papers. You love me, I know that, but sometimes I felt like you loved your empire more." The words pierced deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever could. Adrian lowered his head, ashamed. For the first time in years, he felt powerless in the presence of numbers he couldn't fix, contracts he couldn't rewrite. All he could do was hold her hand. Clara stepped forward quietly. "Mr. King," she said gently, "right now she doesn't need a CEO. She just needs her father." Adrian looked up, and something in his steel, gray eyes softened. He nodded, squeezing his daughter's hand. "Then that's who I'll be. From now on, I promise." The days that followed were a fragile rebirth. Leela remained in the hospital for observation, and Adrian refused to leave her side. His assistants brought him documents to sign. Phones buzzed endlessly, but he waved them away. "Not now," he repeated. "Nothing is more important." The staff whispered in awe. They had never seen the billionaire like this. Sleeping in a chair, spoon-feeding soup to his daughter, humming lullabies under his breath when she stirred restlessly. Clara continued her rounds, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, quietly watching the bond mending before her eyes. She expected Adrian to return to his world once the crisis passed, but each day he surprised her. He asked questions, not about profits, but about healing. He wanted to know how anxiety crippled young patients, how loneliness spread like a silent disease. He listened, really listened, in a way that made Clara realize the billionaire was changing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Adrian found Clara in the hallway. "Why did you stop that night?" he asked suddenly. "You could have walked past. Hundreds did." Clara hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Because I know what it feels like to collapse in plain sight and have no one notice. Years ago, I fainted on a subway after a double shift. People stepped over me until one stranger stopped. That moment saved me. I swore I'd never be the one who looked away." Adrian studied her, his voice rough. "The world needs more people like you." Clara shook her head. "The world just needs more people willing to care." Weeks later, Leela was discharged, her cheeks warmer, her eyes brighter. As they left the hospital, Adrian turned to Clara. "Come with us," he said abruptly. She blinked. "What?" "I want you to stay close to Leela. As her nurse, her guide, whatever you'll call it. You understand her in ways I've failed to, and I trust you." Clara hesitated. Her life was small, her apartment barely furnished, her bills stacked on the counter. She had never imagined working for a man whose name dominated skylines. Yet when she looked at Leela, who clutched her hand with quiet hope, she knew her answer. "Yes," Clara whispered. "I'll stay." What followed was not a fairy tale but a slow, steady transformation. Adrian began scaling back his empire, delegating meetings, missing flights, daring to prioritize bedtime stories over board votes. He walked Leela to school, sat through her art shows, even burned pancakes on Saturday mornings just to hear her laugh. For the first time, the world saw not just a billionaire, but a father rediscovering what it meant to love without conditions. Clara became part of their rhythm. Sometimes nurse, sometimes teacher, sometimes simply a friend who reminded them both to breathe. And though she never sought praise, Adrian never stopped acknowledging her. In quiet moments, his gaze would linger with gratitude too deep for words. Months later, on a spring afternoon, Leela stood at her school recital. The girl who had once collapsed under the weight of silence now stood tall, her voice clear as she sang before a room filled with parents. Adrian sat in the front row, tears unashamed, Clara at his side. When the final note faded, the applause thundered. Leela bowed, her eyes finding her father's. He mouthed the words, "I'm proud of you." And she beamed, her smile brighter than all the lights in the room. As they walked out together, Adrian placed a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. "You were right that night. Caring changed everything." He looked at his daughter, then back at the woman who had stopped on a cold street corner and altered their lives forever. "Thank you for not walking away." And though the city outside still pulsed with noise and hurry, for Adrian and Leela, the world felt different now, slower, warmer, alive with the simple truth that no empire, no fortune, no power compared to the miracle of love rediscovered, and the courage of one nurse who chose to notice.